The night I packed my bags, my wife, Claire, screamed at me like I was the villain. But she didn't know I had uncovered every text, every secret meeting. I wasn't just walking out. I was going to make sure she lost the one thing she valued most. And I'd do it without breaking a single law. I met Claire 8 years ago at a tech conference in Austin. Back then, I was 32 and running on little more than ambition and caffeine. My startup was just starting to get noticed, and I spent most days pitching to investors and trying to convince my team we weren't crazy for believing we could build something that mattered. Claire was there representing a cybersecurity firm. She wasn't just another polished professional trying to sell her company's services. She listened when I spoke about my goals, about how I wanted to create a platform that actually helped people instead of just collecting their data. She asked questions that caught me off guard, made me think deeper about why I was doing what I was doing. She had a way of making you feel seen, like you weren't just another name on her business card. After the conference, I found myself looking for reasons to call her. We'd meet up for coffee whenever she was in town, talking for hours about everything: work, family, how we'd both watched our parents grind away at jobs they hated. For the first time, I felt like I'd found someone who shared my drive and my doubts. 6 months later, we moved in together. It felt fast, but neither of us cared. We told ourselves life was too short to tiptoe around what we wanted. People called us a power couple, and maybe we were. We worked long hours, but we always made time for each other. Weekend hikes, late-night takeout on the couch, last-minute trips to places we couldn't really afford yet. Those were the days I look back on now and wonder how something that felt so solid could ever fall apart. When I proposed, it wasn't some elaborate gesture. I asked her one evening after dinner, while we were cleaning up. She laughed at first, thinking I was joking. But when she realized I was serious, she started to cry. Later, she told me it was the only time she'd felt truly sure about anything. The first few years were good. Better than good. My company took off, and so did hers. We bought a small house just outside the city and talked about starting a family. There were challenges, late nights at the office, stress over deadlines, disagreements about money. But every couple has that. We always came back to each other. Or at least I thought we did. Over time, I started to see the signs, though I didn't want to admit it. The way she'd look past me when I talked, distracted by something she wouldn't share. The nights she said she needed to work late but didn't offer details. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. We were both busy, successful people. Of course our schedules would clash. Of course there'd be times when we'd drift a little. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A distance I couldn't close no matter how hard I tried. I'd ask how her day went, and she'd give me short, careful answers, as if she were afraid to say too much. When we did spend time together, it felt strained, like we were two people going through the motions of being married instead of actually living it. I started noticing little things. An unfamiliar number on her phone that she said was a coworker. A receipt for a dinner at a restaurant we'd never visited together. A faint smell of cologne on her hair the night she came home late. Each time I questioned it, she had an explanation. And each time I convinced myself I was imagining it. The truth was, I didn't want to believe she could betray me. Claire had always been the person I trusted most, the person I believed would never lie to me. I told myself she was just stressed, that maybe we'd lost some of the spark but could find it again if we tried. But trust doesn't erode all at once. It starts with a hairline crack you ignore, then another, until one day you realize the foundation has collapsed. One Friday in early spring, I came home earlier than planned. I'd been out of town meeting with investors, but the flight got moved up, so I decided to surprise her. I thought maybe we could go to dinner, try to reconnect. When I walked into the kitchen, I set my bag down and noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. It was that moment, something so small, so ordinary, that started everything. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. Dylan. My stomach nodded. Maybe it was a colleague. Maybe it was nothing. I almost left it alone. But then it buzzed again. Miss you already. I can't explain why I picked up her phone. Maybe I needed to know I was wrong, that I was just being paranoid. But as I scrolled through the messages, the truth came at me in lines I couldn't unsee. They'd been talking for months, sharing private jokes, making plans to meet. The tone was casual, intimate, like a language she no longer spoke with me. I set the phone down and stood there, staring at the counter, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, demand an explanation. Another part wanted to walk out and never look back. But I didn't do either. Instead, I waited for her to come home. I needed to see if she'd lie to my face. I needed to hear it from her own mouth before I believed it was real. That was the night everything shifted. The night the life I thought we'd built together began to unravel. One message at a time. Claire came home just after sunset. I heard her car in the driveway, the soft click of the door unlocking. For a few seconds, I considered pretending nothing had happened. I could have set her phone back where I'd found it, forced a smile, and asked about her day like I always did. But something in me had changed the moment I read those messages. When she stepped into the kitchen and saw me standing there, she looked surprised. "You're home early," she said. Her voice sounded normal, casual, as if she hadn't been planning secret meetings with someone else. I watched her set her bag down, watched her glance at the phone. I wondered if she was thinking about whether she'd deleted the last message. "I am," I said. My own voice sounded flat in my ears. "I thought it would be nice to spend the evening together." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's sweet." She picked up her phone, tapped the screen, and held it just a little too long before slipping it into her pocket. I almost asked her about Dylan right then. Almost demanded to know who he was and why she was telling him she missed him. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I waited. The next few weeks were like living with a stranger. I pretended nothing was wrong because I needed time to figure out what to do. Every night, I'd lie awake replaying her excuses over and over in my head, comparing them to the evidence I'd already found. I started paying attention to her routines in a way I never had before. If she said she was working late, I noted the time she left and when she came home. I checked our shared calendar for inconsistencies. I tracked the location of her phone when she was out. It felt invasive, but I couldn't trust her word anymore. One evening, she came home later than usual. I was sitting on the couch when she walked in. She looked startled to see me awake. "Hey," she said. "I thought you'd be asleep." "I couldn't," I told her. She nodded, but she didn't ask why. She went straight to the bedroom. I followed a few minutes later, watching her from the doorway as she scrolled through her phone, her face lit by the screen. When she realized I was there, she locked it and set it face down. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." That was the problem. She never questioned why I was suddenly home more often, why I was quiet, why I looked at her like I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. Either she didn't notice or she didn't care. A week later, I decided I needed more than just text messages. If this went to divorce court, I didn't want it to be my word against hers. So I hired a private investigator. His name was Mark, and he didn't ask why I needed his help. He'd seen this before. He told me he'd keep it discreet. For days, I felt like I was walking around with a secret bigger than the one she was hiding. Every time she left the house, I'd wonder if Mark was somewhere nearby, taking photos, collecting proof I wasn't ready to face. One Thursday, Mark called me after sunset. His voice was calm, professional. "She's meeting him right now," he said. My mouth went dry. "Where?" "The Willow Creek Hotel. They've been there before." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to drive over there, burst into whatever room they were in, and force her to look me in the eye. But I stayed on the phone, silent. "Do you want me to keep following them?" Mark asked. "Yes," I said finally. My hand was shaking. "Send me everything." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my office with the door closed, staring at the photos Mark sent me. Claire and Dylan together in the hotel parking lot. Claire standing close to him, her hand on his arm. She looked happy. That was what gutted me most. Not the betrayal itself, but seeing her smile in a way she hadn't in months. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, thanked me for making coffee, and left for work. I watched her go, wondering how many more lies she was capable of telling before she'd finally admit the truth. For the next several days, I went through the motions of being her husband. I showed up to meetings, answered emails, did everything I could to look normal. Inside, I felt like a hollow shell of the man I'd been a year ago. Mark kept sending me updates. Each message was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Claire was careful, never staying too long in one place, never using the same restaurant or hotel twice in a row. But she wasn't careful enough. There was always a pattern, and Mark was good at spotting it. One evening, I decided to search her purse while she showered. My hands were cold as I unzipped it. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe a note, a receipt, something that would confirm in her own handwriting that she'd stopped loving me. I found a second phone. It was small, cheap, the kind you buy with cash so no one can trace it. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the messages. Dylan's name filled the screen. When Claire came out of the bathroom, she froze. She saw me holding the phone, and for the first time, she didn't bother to pretend. "Give me that," she said quietly. I looked at her and knew I didn't need to ask any more questions. She'd already answered all of them. I didn't give her the phone. I put it in my pocket and walked past her without saying a word. In that moment, I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I stopped wondering whether I could forgive her, because I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I didn't sleep the night I found the second phone. I stayed up in my office, staring at the messages over and over until my eyes burned. Each line confirmed what I already knew, but seeing it in writing made it feel final. At 5 a.m, I emailed Mark. I told him to stop following her. I had everything I needed. There was no point gathering more evidence. The choice was clear. I had to end this, but I wasn't going to do it in anger. I didn't want a scene in public or some screaming match where we both said things we couldn't take back. If she had already decided to build a life with Dylan, she could have it. I just wouldn't be part of it. Later that morning, I called my attorney, a woman named Dana I'd known since college. She didn't act surprised when I explained what was happening. She asked if I felt safe, if I needed help moving out. I told her I did. She said she'd prepare the divorce papers right away. After I hung up, I sat in silence. The sun was coming up. It was a bright day, the kind Claire always liked because she said it made the house feel full of energy. The thought of her saying that now made my stomach tighten. Around 9, Claire came into my office. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept either. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. "I'm not going to fight with you," I said. My voice felt steady. "I've hired a lawyer. You'll get the papers soon." She blinked a few times, as if she didn't understand. "You can't just." "I can," I interrupted. "And I will." I stood up, walked past her, and went into the bedroom. I started pulling my clothes from the closet, folding them into boxes. Claire followed me. "Can we please talk about this?" she said. Her voice was low, almost pleading. "I made mistakes. I know that. But this doesn't have to be the end." I kept packing. "You've been meeting him for months. You lied to me every day. That is the end." She tried to reach for my arm. I stepped back. "You can't just leave," she insisted. "We have a life together." I finally looked at her. "No, we had a life together. You threw it away." She opened her mouth, closed it again, and sank down onto the edge of the bed. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That afternoon, I loaded my boxes into my car. I didn't slam the doors or yell. I didn't even tell her goodbye. She stood in the doorway watching me, her arms crossed over her chest. Her face was hard to read. When I got in the driver's seat, she called out, "What are you going to do now?" I looked at her through the window. "Start over." Then I drove away. But it wasn't finished. The next day, I called Claire's employer. I didn't tell them about the affair. That wasn't my business to share. But I did let them know she'd been using company funds to book hotel rooms during work hours. Mark had documented everything. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I wasn't going to let her walk away without consequence. If she thought she could juggle 2 lives forever, she was wrong. Later that week, Dana called to say the divorce papers had been delivered. Claire hadn't responded yet, but she would have to soon. I spent my days in a short-term rental on the other side of town. The place was small and plain, but I didn't care. I only needed space to think and plan. One evening, I got an email from Claire. It was long. Apologies, excuses, promises that she'd do anything to make it right. She asked if we could go to counseling, if I could at least meet her halfway. I didn't reply. 2 days later, she tried calling. I let it go to voicemail. Then she texted, "Please, I don't want to lose you. We can fix this." I turned off the phone. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. The night I drove away, something in me shut off for good. I had spent months living in doubt, questioning my instincts, trying to pretend the person I loved was still there. But she wasn't. She'd been gone long before I found the proof. That weekend, Dana arranged for me to collect the rest of my things while Claire was at work. I went room by room, taking only what belonged to me. Photos, documents, a few books. I left behind everything else. I didn't need reminders of the life we'd shared. When I was finished, I walked through the house one last time. It looked the same as it always had, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Before I locked the door, I left an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was the second phone and a note with 2 sentences. "You chose him. Now live with that choice." I locked the door, dropped the key through the mail slot, and walked to my car. As I pulled away, I felt a strange sense of relief. The hardest part wasn't catching her in the lie. It was admitting to myself that no amount of love or time could change who she'd become. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. After I left, the first few days were quiet. Almost too quiet. My phone didn't buzz with Claire's calls or messages because I'd blocked her number. I stayed in the small rental and tried to focus on work. But every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the last conversations we'd had. I kept thinking about how she'd looked when she realized I had proof she couldn't talk her way out of. It wasn't regret in her eyes. It was fear. Fear that everything she'd built with me was slipping away. And it was. A week later, Dana called to say Claire had finally responded to the divorce papers. She hadn't contested them, but she wanted to keep the house. She'd even offered to buy out my share. I almost laughed when Dana read her proposal. "No," I told her. "She can't have it." "Are you sure?" Dana asked. "You could walk away clean." "I'm sure," I said. "That house was supposed to be ours. She doesn't get to stay there like nothing happened." Claire's lawyer tried again 2 days later, this time offering more money to keep the place. I refused. The house was going on the market. If she wanted a new life with Dylan, she could start it somewhere else. Meanwhile, Mark, the investigator, had sent me the final report with photos and records of every meeting she'd had with Dylan. I didn't plan to use it in court, but I wanted it documented. I wasn't going to let her twist the story later, claiming I'd left her without reason. 3 weeks after I moved out, I ran into Claire by accident. I was coming out of a meeting downtown when I saw her standing on the sidewalk. She looked thinner, tired. For a second, I almost walked the other way, but she spotted me before I could turn. She stepped toward me. "Can we talk?" she asked. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "Please," she whispered. "Just 5 minutes." I agreed, mostly because I wanted closure. We walked to a bench across the street. She sat down first. "I never meant for it to go that far," she began. "You did it anyway," I said. My voice was calm, but my hands were tight in my pockets. "I was lonely," she said. "You were always working. I felt like you didn't even see me anymore." I met her eyes. "And sleeping with someone else was your solution?" She looked away. "It wasn't just about that. Dylan listened to me. He cared." I shook my head. "Then you should have left me before you started seeing him." She didn't answer. "I'm not going to fight you in court," I said. "I just want this finished." Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing. I stood up. "Take care of yourself." As I walked away, I realized that was probably the last time I'd ever speak to her in person. Over the next few weeks, the sale of the house moved quickly. It turned out the market was strong, and the place sold for more than either of us expected. My share went straight into a new savings account. I didn't want any of that money tied to Claire anymore. I moved into a townhouse closer to my office. It wasn't anything special, but it was mine. There were no memories in the walls. No reminders of who I used to be when I still believed in us. Some nights, I caught myself wondering if I could have done something different. If I'd been home more, if I'd noticed the distance sooner, maybe none of this would have happened. But I always came back to the same truth. She had made her choice. One afternoon, Dana called to say the divorce was final. The paperwork had been processed, the accounts split, the property settled. She told me Claire had moved into a small apartment in another part of town. Dylan hadn't moved in with her. That detail didn't surprise me. Affairs are rarely built to last. A week later, I got a letter from Claire. A real letter, handwritten. I almost threw it out without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. She apologized again. She said she'd ruined the best thing in her life. She told me she understood if I never forgave her but wanted me to know she still cared about me. I read it once and put it in a box with the rest of the documents. I didn't write back. The day the movers brought the last of my boxes to the new townhouse, I stood in the middle of the living room and realized how much lighter I felt. No more watching her pretend. No more questioning every word. I went back to my routines. I worked late when I wanted. I took weekends to hike or see friends I'd neglected. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again. Occasionally, people would ask where Claire was. I kept it simple. We're not together anymore. If they pressed, I'd say, it didn't work out. That was true enough. Every once in a while, I'd think about the life we'd planned. The house, the trips, the family we talked about starting. It was hard not to wonder what might have been. But I never regretted leaving. Staying would have cost me more than any divorce ever could. Late one evening, as I was sorting the last of my boxes, I came across an old photo of us. It was taken the day we moved into the house. We looked happy, two people who believed nothing could pull them apart. I put the photo face down in the trash, because that chapter was closed, and there was nothing left worth saving. Weeks passed after the divorce was finalized. Life settled into something steady. I didn't feel happiness exactly, not at first, but I did feel relief. Relief that I no longer had to pretend everything was fine or try to fix what couldn't be repaired. The townhouse felt empty sometimes, but it was honest. There were no hidden phones or excuses, just my own routines, my own space. I started going to the gym again in the mornings. On weekends, I'd take long drives out past the city, just to be alone with my thoughts. I knew some of our old friends were talking. People speculated about what had happened. A few reached out to say they were sorry things hadn't worked out. I appreciated their concern, but I kept most conversations short. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. One afternoon, I stopped by the bank to sign paperwork about closing the joint accounts Claire and I had shared. The teller was polite, efficient. She asked if I wanted to leave a forwarding address for my ex-wife. No, I said. There's nothing left she needs to send me. That night, I thought about how different my life had become in a matter of months. I remembered the day I first suspected something was wrong. The texts, the cold distance in her voice. At the time, I'd felt powerless. Now, I understood I'd only been powerless because I refused to see the truth. When you ignore what you know in your gut, you let someone else decide your worth. A few weeks later, I heard that Claire had left her job. The company hadn't fired her outright, but word got around she'd been using company resources to cover up her affair. It wasn't my doing. After the initial call to HR, I stayed out of it. But it didn't surprise me that her own choices had caught up with her. I didn't feel satisfaction when I learned she'd lost the job. If anything, I felt a kind of pity. But it was mixed with something harder to name, maybe a quiet certainty that consequences matter. No one is exempt from them. In early fall, I took a trip alone to Colorado. I'd always wanted to see the Rockies in September. I rented a cabin near Estes Park, brought a stack of books, and turned off my phone for a week. Each morning, I'd make coffee and watch the sunrise over the mountains. For the first time since everything had ended, I felt something close to peace. On the last day of the trip, I sat on the porch and thought about everything that had happened. I realized I didn't hate Claire. I didn't even resent her anymore. She was simply a person who made choices I couldn't live with. That realization felt like taking off a heavy coat I hadn't noticed I was wearing. When I drove home, I felt clear about what came next. My life wasn't defined by her betrayal or the end of our marriage. It was defined by what I chose to build without her. I went back to work with renewed focus. My company was in the middle of expanding into new markets, and for the first time in a while, I felt excited to be part of it. My team noticed the change. People commented that I seemed lighter, more present. In small ways, I started reconnecting with the version of myself I'd lost somewhere in those last years of our marriage. I picked up old hobbies. I made plans with friends. I stopped avoiding places I used to go with Claire. They were just places, after all. She didn't own my memories. Sometimes, I still wondered why she hadn't ended things before she started the affair. Maybe she was afraid of being alone. Maybe she convinced herself she deserved more than I could give. In the end, it didn't matter. No justification could change the facts. A few months later, I ran into Dylan at a networking event. He looked uncomfortable when he recognized me. He walked over, shifting from foot to foot like he wasn't sure what to say. "I didn't expect to see you here," he began. I nodded. "It's a small city. I wanted to say I'm sorry for how everything happened," he said. His voice was low, as if he was afraid someone might overhear. I studied him for a moment. "You don't owe me an apology," I told him. "You didn't make vows to me." He swallowed, nodded once, and walked away without another word. That was the last time I thought much about him. He was just another part of a story that no longer felt like it belonged to me. By the end of that year, I'd moved into a better place, a condo with a view of the city skyline. My business was thriving. My days were full again, but not the same kind of full they'd been when I was married. This time, I was doing it for myself. One evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel broken. Sometimes, people will betray you in ways you never saw coming. It's easy to think their choices mean something about your worth. But that's a lie. If there was one lesson I'd take with me, it was this: you can't control what someone else does. You can only control how you respond. Walking away wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing I'd ever done. And in the end, that was enough.